Joining me now, Washington Post senior national political correspondent Ashley Parker and former Democratic New York Congressman Joe Crowley and former Chief of Staff to Mike Pence, Mark Short. So, Mark, I remember when Bush 41 called Bill Clinton a bully, and we were shocked and horrified, using the word bully, calling her mentally impaired. What is going on here?
Well, Andrea, I think that it's a reflection of where our politics have pretty much gone across the board. But I think that the biggest challenge is that the issues favor Republicans. The wind should be at our backs when the vast majority of voters are concerned about the economy and the border crisis. But because we keep injecting other storylines into this, it's not, Republicans are not doing as well as they should be.
He's the one doing the injecting.
Absolutely, Andrea. Yeah. I mean, but it would behoove him, too, to stay focused on policy. But the inability to do that, I think, is hurting Republicans across the board right now, because now you have days of news cycles can be focused on his latest personal attack on her, as opposed to actually being able to prosecute the case on the border or on inflation and the economy.
Joe Crowley, do you think that this is an indication that he's nervous?
I think it absolutely is. I think whenever any bully is nervous or is in fear, they resort to name calling. And that's what Donald Trump has done his entire career, his entire life. But here it's pretty interesting because he, again, is attacking a woman. And this is replete throughout history. They're hysterical. They don't know how to lead. And here you have a woman of substance. Here you have a woman who was a prosecutor, was an attorney general, was a U.S. senator, was vice president, and now may very well become the next president of the United States. And he's afraid of her. People are joking about it, but did he lose the debate to someone who was mentally impaired? Or did he win the debate? It's just bizarre. And when you think it can't get any lower, he gets lower. He gets lower. It's just bizarre.
Ashley, I want to also ask you about the NBC poll of Latino registered voters. It shows a shrinking 14-point lead for Harris against Donald Trump. That is a much smaller margin than in other recent elections. The other three elections, Obama, Clinton, obviously, and Biden. So the deficit for Harris among Latino men and the economy, again, was the top issue. She's got a problem with Latino men and with younger Latino voters in general.
That's right. I mean, one thing she has to do, and her people are pretty clear about, is to recreate or come as close as possible to recreating the traditional winning coalition of Democrats, and then potentially run up her numbers in some other places where former President Trump is struggling. And obviously, the larger the margin she can keep with Latino men, the better. It's worth noting, my colleagues and I, we did a story looking at the quote-unquote persuadables recently, and these are the groups of voters, that tiny sliver who both campaigns think will decide this election and who they need to persuade. And I was sort of surprised to find that both campaigns are looking at quote-unquote young voters. That's defined as under 50, and that skews heavily male. And it also over-indexes in both campaigns, again, for men of color, voters of color, which includes Latino men. So it is certainly in the universe that Vice President Harris believes she can win and bring back, in some cases, into the Democratic camp.
But in our poll, this is compared to exit polls. So those numbers of 44% advantage under Obama, I think then became 33 more recently. Those are exit polls, so those are hard numbers. Those aren't projections. Well, she's got a problem.
I think there is an issue here, but I think, people talk about the debate tomorrow night and Tim Walz and the importance of it. I think here is an example of the importance of that. Reaching out, communicating and talking their language as Tim does, talking about fixing a car and at the same time talking about Project 25. 2025. He has that way an ability about him. And so I think it's going to be widely watched because of that. And I think that's part of the answer towards getting some of those folks back.
Well, does Tim Walz have to be concerned? Because J.D. Vance is a good debater. He's an experienced debater. Tim Walz has never done anything like this before. And J.D. Vance can talk circles around a lot of people. We've all seen it in his interviews. This is not Donald Trump.
I think J.D. Vance will shine in that environment, but I candidly think that Governor Walz is also good in that environment. I think it'll be a good debate. I think that they'll both hold each other even. But back to your Hispanic question, Andrea, that has been happening for multiple cycles now. And I think many Hispanics, this is a generalization, I confess, but are in many cases coming to America for a fresh start. And I think when there's a lot of Democrat policies that are overregulation, big government policies that stifle the entrepreneurship of Hispanics, and I think culturally many Catholics are identifying more with the Republican Party today. So this has been a growing trend that Republicans continue to do better with Hispanic voters.
And Joe Crowley, one of our correspondents, Christina Ladagna, was in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania now has one of the highest populations of Latino and Hispanic voters. In that town, it's now 53%, mostly Dominican.
Yep.
And it's becoming a Trump country. You know, if Pennsylvania has those kind of margins in the Hispanic community, Pennsylvania is very close right now.
Yeah, a good number of them coming from New York, quite frankly. But I do think that there is opportunity here. I think that, as I said before, yes, there have been shifts, but at the same time, I think Kamala can relate, especially to women within those families as well. And we know that women play an oversized role when it comes to politics in their families as well.
Mark, right now, how do you see the campaign in terms of Donald Trump, who did so badly with FEMA in response to storms? He's in Georgia today. He's on the scene. Whereas President Biden, Vice President, more traditionally are waiting until the rescue and recovery efforts are beginning to bear fruit before they go in and
Well,
interfere.
I think, look, an incumbent administration cannot look as if they're waiting on anybody right now. I think that it's important to be seen as stepping forward and leaning into these efforts.
So the floods could become an issue.
Yeah, I think particularly it's Georgia and North Carolina are two pivotal states right now, and so I think that that even if they're not going to be on the ground and say we don't want to get in the way of the rescue workers, there are things they can be doing from D.C. to show they're on top of the situation as opposed to being invisible.
But I think they're doing a lot more than people know. And we still have
that's a problem.
150 people missing in North Carolina. There's still a rescue mission going on. And I think anyone going to those states right now is irresponsible.